There is other news in addition to the war in the Gulf. We'll take time now to bring you up to date on some other stories. A Missouri court has forced the father of a brain-damaged woman to delay plans to move his daughter to a facility in another state. The 20-year-old woman who suffered severe brain damage in a 1987 car crash is being kept alive by a feeding tube. Pete Busalachi wants to take his daughter to a state with a more lenient right-to-die law. He wants her life support disconnected. Eastern Airlines is grounded after 62 years of flight. Passengers arriving at airports last night were told that Eastern flights had been canceled indefinitely. Eastern remains in Chapter 11 reorganization under bankruptcy laws, but has not filed for Chapter 7 liquidation. Eastern was crippled by huge debts, an unresolved strike, falling ticket sales, and soaring fuel costs. For weeks before last night's shutdown, Eastern Airlines had been losing up to $2.5 million a day. The president of Lithuania says he has been promised support from the United States. Vytautas Landsbergis says the U.S. consul based in Leningrad has told him that the U.S. guarantees it is on Lithuania's side. But the consul has not been reached for confirmation. Meanwhile, the Lithuanian government works in its parliament building, barricaded from possible assault by Soviet troops. Last Sunday, at least 14 people died during a military assault. The action in Lithuania has prompted at least one of Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev's top economic aides to resign. Nikolai Petrikov also is one of 30 signatories blasting Mr. Gorbachev's government in a Moscow news editorial.
The symbol of U.S. liberty has become a polarizing element in the debate over the liberation of Kuwait. On one side, anti-war protesters who burn the American flag to display their outrage. On the other, demonstrators who wave the stars and stripes in support for Operation Desert Storm. Both are loudly expressing their views on the streets of America, as CNN's Don Knapp reports.
USA! USA! Demonstrators at Whittier College in California burned Saddam Hussein in effigy in a show of support for U.S. involvement in the Gulf War. Los Angeles police arrested about 100 demonstrators at UCLA after they staged a sit-in at the administration building. The Detroit suburb of Northville has decided to call itself a war support city. A chapter of the Military Family Support Group decorated the city with...
We interrupt that report now to go live to London. Britain's new Prime Minister, John Major, is taking questions. Let's listen in.
Particular war and in the midst of a civilian area. The State of Israel have a perfect right in international law to respond. And I think their restraint thus far has been admirable. I think it would be extremely helpful if that restraint continued, but I understand the pressures that the Israeli government are under.
Prime Minister, could you give your reaction to this? Are you confident that all Scud missile launches can be found and destroyed?
We've had a considerable amount of success thus far in finding them and destroying them. Both the United States Air Force and ours have destroyed Scud missile launchers. We cannot, of course, be precisely sure how many the Iraqis have. They clearly have a substantial number left. The mission to seek them out and destroy them will continue until we're satisfied they've all been found and destroyed.
You welcome the undertakings from the Egyptians and the Syrians, which comes as a surprise?
I think they are welcome. I think they may come less of a surprise to us than to some others. The Egyptians and the Syrians have been very resolute throughout this whole affair. That was very plain to me when I met President Mubarak in Cairo just 10 days or so ago.
Prime Minister, it would be concerned you've expressed today again. Will you be in direct contact with Prime Minister Shamir today or tomorrow?
Well, I've sent him 2 messages over the period of the last few hours. It may well be there will be a further message, but at the moment there is no need for a further message at this moment.
So could you give your reaction to the fact that a British plane has now taken out one of the Scud missiles?
Well, I'm delighted that they've done so. It was found by a British reconnaissance plane and destroyed by the British. I'm delighted that that is so. The Americans have had very considerable success. It's now clear that the British are having success as well, and we too will concentrate on that. It is very important for a large number of self-evident reasons that those Scud missile launchers are destroyed, and destroyed as soon as possible.
Are you feeling confident, Prime Minister?
I'm in absolutely no doubt about the outcome of this conflict. There is absolutely no doubt about that. The outcome of this conflict, if Saddam Hussein doesn't withdraw, is that Iraq will be defeated. There is no conceivable doubt about that. But it may take a while before that is satisfactorily concluded.
Are you certain now that we're talking really about weeks The initial euphoria has obviously gone from people's minds, but should people be settling into thinking now of a conflict in weeks?
Well, I never indulged myself in that initial euphoria. It was always clear to me that the sheer size and scale of their military arsenal meant that it was likely that it would be some time before this matter was resolved. You can never be sure in the fog of this sort of conflict precisely how long it will take. We don't know whether the morale of the Iraqi troops will crack. We simply can't tell about that. But on the understanding that that doesn't happen, then it may be a considerable time before the matter is satisfactorily concluded.
Prime Minister, can you define for us exactly your war aims? You said in the Commons that you hope that Saddam Hussein would be gone. I think indicating that you hoped internally something might happen to him. But is it simply to liberate Kuwait, or is there to do much more?
The aims are set out quite clearly in the Security Council resolutions. Those are the war aims of all of us, and I have nothing to add to that. Now, I think I'll take one last question, if I may.
You're stressing today again, in the clearest of terms, that people should not think this is going to be a short affair. Does the fact that you keep on stressing this point show that perhaps you're rather more concerned that you're letting on?
No, it doesn't mean that at all. It's all going very satisfactorily. What it does illustrate is the sheer size and scale of the armour, the men, the airfields, the planes that the Iraqis have. Now, that is a very considerable arsenal. They have devoted a huge amount of their resources throughout the period of the last decade to building up that arsenal. And although there is no way that they will be able to win this conflict, it will take a while before we can fully destroy the arsenal that they have got, unless they surrender at some stage before that. And that is the warning that I'm making clear to people. They ought not to be concerned about the fact that this conflict continues. It was always likely that it would have to continue for a significant period of time. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
A fairly optimistic Prime Minister John Major speaking to reporters outside 10 Downing Street about the situation in the war in the Gulf. Molly?
We now return to CNN's Don Knapp. His report on opposing views of the Gulf War is seen in the streets of America.
Demonstrators at Whittier College in California burned Saddam Hussein in effigy in a show of support for U.S. involvement in the Gulf War. Los Angeles police arrested about 100 demonstrators at UCLA after they staged a sit-in at the administration building. The Detroit suburb of Northville has decided to call itself a war support city. A chapter of the Military Family Support Group decorated the city with red, white, and blue ribbons and pictures of troops. War protesters in Chicago Friday marched through the loop, then blocked traffic by sitting down in an intersection. 36 protesters were arrested in New York after they blocked entrances to the federal building. This quiet demonstration by a group of religious war protesters was in sharp contrast to the sometimes violent protests of the past week in San Francisco.
Well, I am angry, but I am also quietly angry because I really want people to start thinking, you know, what we are doing.
Although peaceful, the demonstrators decided to get themselves arrested with acts of civil disobedience.
Entering or remaining on the Presidio of San Francisco for any of these prohibited purposes is in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 13.
About 50 of the demonstrators climbed over an unguarded low wall of the Presidio of San Francisco in a deliberate effort to get arrested.
I just think that what we're doing is morally wrong. You have to sometimes do something that you don't want to do because you need to do it.
Military and civilian police officers in San Francisco have arrested well over 1,600 demonstrators in this week of anti-war protest. Don Knapp, CNN, San Francisco.
A CNN program note here. Much of CNN's regular weekend news feature programming is preempted for continuous coverage of the war in the Gulf. Many sports shows will air as scheduled, but other feature programs have been suspended this weekend.
Also coming up as part of our coverage of the war in the Gulf, within the next hour, we are hoping to be able to bring you live from Amman, Jordan, a news conference from Jordan's King Hussein. That should be within the next 30 minutes. Thanks for being with us. I'm Rick Moore.
I'm Molly McCoy. Stay tuned to CNN.
is CNN.
Good morning. CNN's coverage of war in the Gulf continues. I'm Bob Kane.
And I'm Bobby Batista. There is late word from the White House at this hour, so let's go directly to Frank Sesno. Frank, good morning.
Good morning, Bobby. The situation in Israel is the #1 concern here in Washington today. Diplomatic sources tell CNN that President Bush spoke overnight with Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. It was his second conversation in 24 hours with Shamir. It followed the second Iraqi attack on Israel. These diplomatic sources tell CNN the president expressed his outrage at the continued attack that Israel is coming under and offered his sympathy for the situation that Israel now confronts. I don't have particular details on exactly what Shamir said in return. Today, the president is at Camp David. It's where that telephone call was made from. He received updates throughout the night from his national security advisor, Brent Scowcroft. The U.S. has made another bombing run over western Iraq, still seeking to search for and destroy the remaining mobile Scud launchers that are causing all these problems in and around Israel. This has become the #1 priority in that part of Iraq and for the coalition. In addition to that, CNN can confirm that the United States is sending more Patriot missiles to Israel. We are told they are en route. They perhaps have already arrived, though it takes some time to make them operational. Clearly, the Bush administration going out of its way now to reassure with material as well as verbal support Israel that it will be protected. The U.S. is trying to do everything it can to keep Israel out of this situation. One source says the Israelis recognize the deep political problem that this whole situation causes for the United States and the coalition, which contains some Arab members. And in one source's words, they have been damn good. The Israelis have been damn good about keeping out of this so far. Some believe the Israelis will continue to lay low, while saying that they will retaliate, that they will respond. The question remains when. Timing is everything. Now, the Syrians earlier today, through their information ministry, said that they would side with any Arab nation attacked by Israel. There is some feeling within the Bush administration that this represents a certain degree of political posturing for domestic consumption. The feeling is the coalition is in pretty good shape. Syria is the only serious question mark, but most seem to feel that Syria would have a difficult time pulling out as long as an Israeli response was proportionate. But so far, the Israelis are lying low, and the administration is continuing to urge them to do so. President Bush will be receiving a briefing from Pentagon briefers attended by his national security advisor and the vice president at Camp David today. We are told, so far anyway, no changes in the president's schedule. Now, Linda Scherzer is standing by in Israel. Linda, how is this whole situation being viewed there, and is there a great sense of imminence to some kind of Israeli retaliation?
Well, Frank, the attack this morning didn't come as a complete surprise this time. Israel was expecting that Iraq would try and launch another round of missiles into Israel to provoke Israel into retaliating, to try and drive a wedge into the U.S.-Arab coalition, and to turn this conflict from an allied war against Iraq into an Arab war against Israel. The 7 a.m. alarm shattered the still of the Sabbath morning. Jewish worshippers were on their way to synagogue, some wearing their gas masks underneath prayer shawls, when the piercing siren sounded, warning everyone to get inside fast. It was the second attack on Israel in 30 hours. Israeli leaders were outraged and say that whatever patience they had before has been depleted by Saddam Hussein's latest attack.
We are not going to let him take our whole country as hostage. This is a terrorist act against the entire country of Israel.
Although Israel had vowed immediate retaliation if attacked, the decision had apparently been made after Friday's missile strike to hold back, to give the U.S. and its allies more time to search out and destroy remaining Iraqi missiles that were poised towards Israel. But the country's leaders say they can't continue to rely on the U.S. or anyone else to get the job done.
I think that the main objective has got to be to stop the missiles. That's the threat.
That's what really bothers the Israelis, and that's what got to be stopped. Unfortunately, the Americans couldn't stop it. So I think we will have to stop it.
But if Israel strikes Iraq, what will become of the U.S. Arab coalition? Will American allies like Syria stand firmly with the United States, or will it side with Iraq and go after its old enemy, Israel? Leaders here believe that the Arab countries understand how and why Israel is being provoked.
We've heard statements, official statements, by a representative of Egypt, a key member of the coalition, a representative of Syria, another key member of the coalition. And each one of them said that if Israel is attacked, then Israel obviously has the right to respond, and that they would not be involved in that response. I think that tells you that maybe Saddam's ploy, having been exposed, is not going to work at all.
Now, until all those missile launchers are destroyed, the Army is advising, or in fact warning the public that these attacks could continue. For that reason, schools will be closed again tomorrow. The public is still being warned to stay off the streets, to stay inside their homes. But the Army is telling its people that they will not have to endure living this way for very long. Linda Scherzer reporting live from Jerusalem.
Linda Scherzer in Jerusalem. It's Frank Sesno again at the White House. I'd like to just ask you one thing. Here within the Bush administration, it's said that three main factors have kept the Israelis out so far. One, that chemical weapons have not been used. Two, that the targets that have been hit have not been militarily significant, and there have been no deaths. And three, that the Israelis have a tendency to wait for a time before they respond. So while they can say they will respond, the question remains when. Just how much do you think all these factors are playing into Israeli thinking at this time?
Well, it seems that the Israeli government can certainly count on growing pressure from the population to respond in some way. Frank, Israelis are getting increasingly worried that as the air raid sirens sound, they are being sent into their sealed rooms, that actually they should be going into bomb shelters. They do not want to have to endure living this way for very long. They wonder how much more they have to take before Israel will go and do the job. Of course, what Israeli officials, what sources had been saying yesterday is that because the casualty rate was so low, that because chemical weapons were not used, that maybe Israel would not respond. But Israel can't count on the fact that Iraq won't launch warheads, missiles that contain chemical warheads in the future, and for that reason there is a growing pressure for Israel to act very soon.
The number one concern here at the White House is that this war could widen. It's being watched very carefully. Thank you, Linda Scherzer in Jerusalem. I'm Frank Sesno at the White House. Now back to Bob Kane in Atlanta.
As you most probably know by now, Israel hit Tel Aviv again this morning just after dawn, Israeli time, with more Scud missiles. Israeli authorities say that strike will be answered. They don't say how or when. Syria's information minister says his country may fight against Israel if Israel does attack any other Arab nation. 4 U.S. Marines are reported wounded by, by Iraqi artillery fire yesterday in a clash near the Kuwaiti border. The reports say U.S. planes and helicopters were called into attack. The report also says as many as 40 Iraqi soldiers were believed to have been killed in that clash. Now, with more on this morning's developments in the Gulf War, we turn to CNN's Mark Leff.
Israel says it will retaliate for the Saturday morning Iraqi missile attack in and around Tel Aviv, the second in as many days, but it won't say how or when. Israeli officials differ on the number of Scud missiles that hit Saturday morning, but they do say there were a dozen or so people hurt. From Baghdad, official radio said Iraq had launched 11 missiles on Saturday. The government told the few remaining non-Iraqi reporters who'd been working under tight censorship that they would have to leave the country. The anti-Iraq coalition that began bombing Iraqi targets early Thursday morning stepped up the search for Iraq's remaining Scud missile launching sites.
RAF Tornado GR-1s have been involved particularly in sorties against targets in western Iraq, as part of the coalition determination to deal with the scud, in particular the scud threat, that we are determined to eliminate.
A senior French military official said Allied air raids had hit 10 of 40 mobile Scud missile launchers before the latest wave of attacks. A Lebanese newspaper reports the Islamic Jihad group is warning that Western hostages held in Beirut may be hurt or executed because of the attacks on Iraq. For the second time in 16 months, the staff of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut has left the Lebanese capital because of threats of terrorism. And the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok says it has word there could be a terrorist attack in Thailand this weekend. There are reports that the Egyptian government is restricting access to tourist sites and that the Saudi government is restricting traffic on the causeway linking Bahrain to the Saudi mainland. The U.S. Navy says it's confirmed mines floating off Bahrain. It's warning merchant ship captains that they enter the Persian Gulf at their own risk. As the Iraqi government called for worldwide attacks against U.S. interests, police in Los Angeles Friday night combed an arriving jumbo jet from London after the airline reported a bomb threat. Authorities isolated the 300 passengers for 4 hours, but found nothing. The U.S. Defense Department, which requisitioned 29 civilian planes last August to help move equipment to Saudi Arabia, has now upped the requirement to nearly 200 aircraft. And before President Bush headed to Camp David, Maryland late Friday, he signed an executive order authorizing the Defense Department to call up more military reservists and to extend their maximum allowed active duty time from 6 months to 2 years. Mark Leff, CNN, reporting.
Mark mentioned in his package mines off the coast of Bahrain, and there is further information about that military move by Iraq. Rick Salinger is in Saudi Arabia and joins us now with this update. Rick, how you doing?
Bobby, not only have mines been found in the waters off Bahrain, which is just to the east of us, off the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia, but some additionally have been found surrounding the waters of the Persian Gulf by the United Arab Emirates. Now, as far as we know, none of those mines have been successful in doing any damage to any U.S. ships or any of those from the multinational force, but they have been found, and merchant ships are being told to stay out of the area. In addition to that, 2 U.S. aircraft are reported to have been missing today, so that brings the total number to around 7. We'll get a complete update a bit later on from Central Command in Riyadh. The latest 2 are 2-man crew F-15s and an A-6 was the second one. We have heard a great deal from the pilots of the fighters and bombers that have been going into Iraq, making their runs, but we haven't heard a great deal from those behind the scenes. Now we have an interview with a Staff Sergeant Ted Poe, who is an Aircrew life support specialist, but he deals with our survival capabilities. In effect, he is the last man that the pilots speak to before they go out on their missions.
You make them laugh. You talk to them. You treat them like it's a normal day. We've got 14 guys that are working on the shifts as the crews come in, and we make them laugh. And they come back and they joke with us, and as we're issuing the stuff to them, that's our way of making them relax, and that's our whole idea.
What about on the way back? What happens after they come back?
After they come back, they're pumped, and they are pumped to the highest edge. They come back, they want to tell us what they've done. We want to know what they've been doing. And well, what can I say? It's an excitement thing.
The pilots that he deals with are those of the EF-111A, the Raven. It has a tactical electronic jamming system. They go in there and try and make it difficult, if not impossible, for the Iraqi forces to use their ground defenses and train their weapons electronically on the incoming warplanes. Nevertheless, the fighter bombers have been greeted with surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery. Thanks to the electronic jamming, almost all the Iraqi aircraft fire has gone to miss its target. One more development here in eastern Saudi Arabia today, and that is that the U.S. Consul General is advising U.S. citizens and their dependents that if they want to make a voluntary departure from the area, the U.S. will provide military aircraft. Those who are interested are instructed to get in touch with the U.S. Consul General in Dhahran. This is not an evacuation. They are emphasizing merely a voluntary departure. However, a large number of people are calling us here at CNN, and it is quite clear that they are having a big case of the war jitters. Reporting live from eastern Saudi Arabia, I'm Rick Salinger, CNN.
British Prime Minister John Major talks with members of the news media outside his number 10 Downing Street residence in London about the Persian Gulf War this morning, a short while ago. We will listen to his comments when our coverage continues.
World economics, a complex, ever-changing machine. What happens within its delicate framework affects every minute of your life. Whether your concerns are on Main Street or with Wall Street, you need information to manage them intelligently. Every day, CNN gives you a thorough look at changes in the economics machine, viewing details in ways you can understand. Business news to keep you in time with change on CNN.
Part of what was discussed in a Pentagon briefing earlier today was the number of U.S. and Allied force airmen and planes that have been missing in the concentrated attack on Iraq. The latest figures and numbers that we have on that is that there have been 4 planes downed from the United States, one of those an F-18 Hornet, 2 of them A-6 Intruders, and 1 an F-15E Eagle attack jet. 7 pilots are missing from those 4 planes. From Britain, 2 planes are down with 4 pilots missing. Italy, 1 plane down with 2 pilots missing. And from Kuwait, the last country participating in this Allied attack, 1 plane down and 1 pilot missing.
British Prime Minister John Major talked with reporters about overnight developments and his current stance in the Persian Gulf War outside his official residence at number 10 Downing Street this morning. Let's listen to his comments.
Despite all the damage that has been done, there is a great deal still that needs to be done. They have a very substantial military arsenal, a large number of planes, a considerable amount of armor, a large number of men, very substantial and sophisticated equipment, and telecommunications installations. The air attacks upon them have been very successful thus far, and I anticipate that they will continue for some time to come. It has been a good start, undoubtedly, but there is a very considerable amount still to be done. What I think is becoming totally clear, clearer as hour succeeds hour, is that Iraq cannot win this conflict, but there is still some considerable way to go before they have lost. Now, if I can, I will try and answer any questions you may have, starting perhaps with Mr. Brunson.
Thank you. Prime Minister, you'll have heard that Mr. Arons said that Israel will retaliate. Do you understand that? And when you talk of restraint, would you accept that they may want to take some limited military action of their own?
Of course I understand that. The provocation that has been offered to the state of Israel after the last 2 days could hardly be overstated. On 2 occasions they've had a missile attack whilst they are not a combatant in this particular war and in the midst of a civilian area. The state of Israel have a perfect right in international law to respond, and I think their restraint thus far has been admirable. I think it would be extremely helpful if that restraint continued, but I understand the pressures that the Israeli government are under.
Are you confident that all Scud missile launchers can be found and destroyed?
We've had a considerable amount of success thus far in finding them and destroying them. Both the United States Air Force and ours have destroyed Scud missile launchers. We cannot, of course, be precisely sure how many the Iraqis have. They clearly have a substantial number left. The mission to seek them out and destroy them will continue until we're satisfied they've all been found and destroyed.
The world leader involved in the Persian Gulf crisis, who might best be described as the man in the middle, Jordan's King Hussein, also is expected to speak out later this morning within the hour, perhaps in as little as half an hour from now. CNN expects to bring you live coverage of King Hussein's remarks. Bobby?
To get some further analysis now of what is happening in the Gulf and the events surrounding the Allied attack and the attack on Israel, the 2 attacks on Israel in the last 2 days, Major General Fred Haynes is going to join us this morning. And General Haynes is retired from the U.S. Marine Corps and is a Middle East consultant. He is the president of the American Friends of Turkey, a nonprofit organization whose purpose is to promote defense, cultural, and commercial ties between the 2 nations. Good morning, General. How are you?
Good morning, Bobby. It's good to be here.
Thank you. With your connection to Turkey and your knowledge thereof, let's talk about that for a moment. From a strategic standpoint, it is certainly significant that Turkish military troops and air bases have been added to the Allied force. What will this mean?
Well, I think this is one of the most significant events in recent days for the coalition. There are 2 major effects of it. The first is that it is possible now for the Turkish government, if they wish, to commit troops outside of their borders. They can put forces down into the area of Saudi Arabia, or they can move across the Turkey-Iraq border. The second and perhaps significant element that has the most immediate effect is that it opens up to air attack the northern quadrant of Iraq. It means that aircraft can fly from Turkey to attack targets in Iraq. It also gives the opportunity for forces in Saudi Arabia to fly across Iraq, do their business there, and then recover at air bases in Turkey. Very important development.
How willing, though, are the Turkish people to fight, and what will this mean for Turkey politically?
Well, I think that the vote in the parliament was a fairly close vote. It does show, however, full confidence that if it is essential, the Turkish people will certainly support actions required by the situation. I do not think that the involvement of Turkish ground troops is imminent, although they are deployed on the Iraqi border, and they are tying up, just by being there, about 10 Iraqi divisions. On the other hand, the U.S. use or Allied use of the air bases, I think the Turkish people probably support very fully. They're a staunch ally of the United Nations and of the U.S.
Let's use your military expertise a little bit here now. 2 days into this conflict, the Iraqi Air Force would seem to be crippled by continued Allied airstrikes, and yet Saddam continues to play games with Israel. What really is your assessment of this conflict after 2 days?
Well, I think, Bobby, that we're seeing a couple of things happening. First of all, I believe that our electronic warfare capabilities and the intensity of our attacks and the accuracy of the attacks has tended to cripple Saddam Hussein's command and control system. I think it's very difficult for him to handle his forces now. Secondly, the Scuds are a threat to Israel, and it's obvious that he is trying to bring Israel into the conflict. But I think that our steady, careful approach to the destruction of the Scuds will, in the end, pay off and will reduce that threat to a very minimum level.
Is Israel doing the right thing by using restraint, or should they have retaliated?
Oh, I am very proud of what Israeli forces are doing. I think they ought to exercise restraint. I think it's not in the best interest of Israel or of the coalition for them to enter the fray.
Well, speaking of the coalition, what happens if Israel is pulled into this conflict?
It's very difficult to say the extent to which Syria will withdraw. I do not think that the Egyptians are likely to pull out of it. This is a personal view. I believe the coalition in general will hold together, and we have quite adequate forces in the long run to defeat Saddam Hussein. The British Prime Minister is right. Hussein can't win in the military sense.
The Pentagon said earlier today that the war won't go to the ground until February. Why?
I think that that is based on a simple premise that one wants complete air superiority whenever one undertakes a ground portion of the war. I would accept that as a general premise, but I do think that we're in a position fairly soon to move into a ground phase of the war.
Well, it would appear that Iraq is trying to pull us into a ground phase. Wouldn't you agree? There's been some skirmishes on the Saudi border.
There have been. I believe that a good deal of preparation is needed first for us to move into a ground phase, but I have to say that having utilized myself in Vietnam, the B-52 as a tactical force, for example, that carpet bombing is very, very accurate, and that when we begin to concentrate on the Iraqi ground forces, they're in for a very, very tough time of it.
Do you have a sense at this point as to how long this conflict might last?
I have speculated that it could be a long or a short one. Now, that's a very equivocal answer. My feeling is that it will be relatively short, however. I believe that we are paralyzing the communications, the command and control capability of the Iraqi, and there's no question that we have superior power. If we use that in an imaginative and a rapid way, once we get into the ground phase of the war, I do not expect it to last very long after that. I'm talking a matter of a number of weeks But we'll have forces there for a good while after that.
All right, General Haynes, thanks very much for your insight. And if you would stick around with us for a little while, as we may use your expertise later on again in this hour. Thank you.
I'll be happy to.
Bob?
It is Saturday, but it is certainly not a weekend in the Persian Gulf War. Several program notes regarding developments taking place in the war theater today. In just over 15 minutes from now, at about 8:45 a.m. Eastern Time, the U.S. Joint Forces Command in Riyadh, the Saudi Arabian capital, is to issue a statement. CNN has no idea what that statement may be or even be about, but we expect to bring you live coverage. About 15 minutes after that, also in Riyadh, the British Military Command is to hold a military briefing. We will carry that live also. And an hour later, at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, the U.S. Military Command issues its press briefing. That'll be at 6 o'clock Saudi Arabian time, and we will bring you live coverage of that.
This is CNN.
The threat, however tenuous it may be, of a wider war in the Persian Gulf seems to loom. Syria says it will side with any Arab nation attacked by Israel. Israeli officials say a second Scud missile attack on Tel Aviv just after dawn Israeli time will not go unanswered. But those officials are not saying how or when Israel will respond. President Bush is still trying to keep Israel out of the fighting. Israel's entry into the war could break apart the anti-Iraq coalition. That is the fear. The United States has made finding and destroying Iraqi Scud missile sites a top priority in the meantime, but some in Israel wonder whether the U.S. can get that job done. CNN learned this morning the United States is sending more Patriot missiles to Israel. They are the kind that can down Scuds. And President Bush talked with Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir overnight. No details were given on that conversation. One U.S. official says Israel has been, in his words, damn good about staying out of the fighting so far. The U.S. has reportedly made another bombing run aimed at those Scud missile sites, and Britain's Defense Secretary Tom King said this morning more missile launchers had been identified by British pilots and were being attacked. All international journalists in Iraq are being told to leave the country. They're in the process of doing that. The Iraqi authorities say conditions are simply not right for reporters to stay in the capital.
Well, U.S. Marines in Saudi Arabia are awaiting their orders, ready to fight when needed. CNN's Linda Patillo is with a group of Marines in the Saudi desert.
Throughout the morning, fighter jets continued to head north overhead. Navy corpsmen at two 150-bed field hospitals rushed to finish operating rooms and prepared to treat any casualties from an Iraqi counterattack. Marines tuned shortwave radios into any reports they could find. For the Marines here, the war began hours before dawn with the sound of squadrons of fighter jets flying overhead.
I was awake at 04 this morning when we heard the birds going over. We saw flashes over there in the horizon. We had a pretty good idea something was going down. We didn't know before that. And my personal reaction is I'm glad we're finally getting it started. I believe personally that we didn't need to keep waiting. We gave him his chance. He didn't move. Now it's the U.S.'s turn to go ahead and run with the ball.
What was the reaction of people that you were with when you heard the birds going over, as you said?
Everybody who was with me had the same idea.
It was about 3 o'clock this morning that I could hear a lot of planes going over continuously for a while, and then about 5 o'clock I had a trouble call come in. And that's when I was told that they started the bombing and go outside, take a look, and you can see them doing their job. Very, very proud of them.
Early this morning, I heard the ground shake a little bit, so I woke up and realized what was going on. In a way, it was a little scary, but it's pretty good news. You know, our air's taking over like that.
There are fears this huge forward supply center could be a target for Iraqi counterattack. Marines spent the day digging in. As long as the battle continues in the air, they can only wait for news and prepare for the call that the ground troops are moving in. This is Linda Patillo with the Marines in Saudi Arabia.
CNN correspondent Jeff Flock has, for the past week or so, been traveling through the heartland of the United States, taking the pulse and the heartbeat of Americans left stateside on the war in the Gulf. Jeff today is in Wichita. Morning, Jeff.
That's right, Bob. Good morning to you. Our trek continues here this morning in Wichita, Kansas. We are at a place called Jimmy's Diner. The sun just begins to rise here this morning, and of course, as it does, the newspapers are out and folks are beginning to come in for their morning coffee and beginning to think about the developments overnight and get a sense for those. Let's sample some reaction here this morning. I see you're reading the newspaper there, sir. What's your sense this morning?
Well, I feel that I support our president in his reaction to what's going on in the Gulf. I believe that that type of activity we should take a stand against it.
As we hear news of the war potentially widening, how does that make you feel?
It's frightening, depressing.
Thank you. Thanks very much, sir. Let's move over to this gentleman here. You're reading that newspaper this morning. You're up to speed on developments overnight. What's your sense?
I don't believe we belong over there. We didn't let sanctions work, and we got innocent people dying over there.
Understand. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your comments. Let's try one more table. I think we've got room for one more table here this morning. Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Your sense this morning as you hear the latest developments, how do they strike you this morning?
You mean about the Iraqi missile?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just a matter of time. I think that's what was going to happen anyway, and I think our president already had that figured out.
Mm-hmm. What about you, ma'am? We hear news of the war potentially widening. Are you ready for all this?
Not really. I think I'm going to have to accept it.
Yeah. Your sense, should we be there? Should we not be there? Are we doing the right thing? What's your sense?
I think we're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. How about you, ma'am? Obviously, as we hear news of the situation not improving as things continue, what goes through your mind?
Well, I hope that they just get in there and get it over with and don't drag it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because the longer they wait, the more people will be killed.
Mm-hmm. How about you, sir? What's your sense this morning on all of this?
Well, after hearing that Iraq had sent missiles into Israel again, I just hope the coalition will hold. Real bothered about that.
Understand. Okay, that's it from here. I'm Jeff Locke, CNN, reporting live from Wichita, Kansas.
A late development, Lieutenant Colonel Greg Pepin in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Command Headquarters, is about to deliver a statement to the reporters who are assembled there. We don't know, or at least are not able to tell you at this point, the nature of his statement. This is Lieutenant Colonel Greg Pepin. This is the same location where we have previously seen General Norman Schwarzkopf deliver statements summing up the status of the military operation there. Here is Colonel Pepin.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Greg Pepin is about to make a short statement on an incident involving the Army and the Navy forces here in Operation Desert Storm. Unfortunately, we'll be unable to take any questions on this incident because we're still receiving information on it. Once we've made it, you'll have as much information as we have right now. Colonel Pepin.
Ladies and gentlemen, last night the guided missile frigate, the USS Nicholas, and Army helicopters, together with a Kuwaiti patrol boat, engaged and neutralized Iraqi forces operating from 9 Kuwaiti oil platforms in the northern Arabian Gulf. The Iraqi forces have been firing on coalition aircraft with anti-aircraft artillery and shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. 12 Iraqi prisoners were taken and are presently aboard the Kuwaiti patrol boat and the USS Nicholas. The Iraqi soldiers will be transferred to a United States Marine holding facility and eventually transferred to a prisoner of war camp. This is all the information we have on this incident at this time.
And as we were forewarned, the military is taking no questions. They simply had that statement to deliver. They delivered it. CNN Pentagon correspondent Gene Randall is standing by. Gene, were you aware, had you been made aware by U.S. sources that this had happened?
Bob, in short, the answer is no. I'm just looking at the statement right now, as a matter of fact. Certainly, it's the first incident of its kind. These are the first Iraqi prisoners that we know of. This took everyone here by surprise, not just journalists, but Pentagon officials themselves. And so they've had very little reaction to it because they just didn't know about it. They weren't aware that this announcement was scheduled until we told them that it was going to be held in Riyadh. So we'll need some time to work the story, as they say.
It seems to say something about U.S. engagement of Iraqi forces in and near Kuwait, Gene. And we have been able to get very little information on that up to this point. General Schwarzkopf, for example, has given virtually no specifics of military operations in Kuwait, as I recall, other than to say they're going about as expected. Am I correct?
That's exactly right, Bob. We've been led to believe that the air bombardment campaign will last for some time, probably into February, and that the movement of U.S. ground forces and coalition forces near the Kuwaiti border could be anticipated for an eventual ground assault. At the same time, we are told they would respond to any kind of action by Iraqi forces over the border. But for now, at least, I suppose we can expect to see from time to time action along the border, but no full-scale frontal assault until the air bombardment campaign has gone a bit longer than this.
All right, thank you, and we will be hearing further from you on this, Correspondent Gene Randall. Once again, the announcement from military sources in Riyadh, the U.S. Military Command Headquarters, was that U.S. forces, Army helicopters, and one U.S. warship engaged Iraqi troops operating from Kuwaiti oil platforms in the North Arabian Sea. They captured prisoners of war. CNN military analyst Blackwell joins us now from our bureau in Washington. Mr. Blackwell, good morning.
Good morning.
What do you make of this?
Well, again, sketchy details from official press announcements are difficult to speculate upon, but I'd just like to point out two things and remind ourselves of some things that have been going on. Remember, on the first night, Bernard Shaw saw helicopters flying around at night in Baghdad. The speculation at that time was that they may well have been American Special Operating Forces. And by my count, there are thousands of commando-type forces deployed with allied coalition forces from all the participating members. This action reported on the Kuwaiti oil platform is typical of a Special Operating Force type of raid, in which forces from Navy, Marine, Army, and even Air Force Special Operating Forces coordinate a very highly orchestrated raid type operation. And my guess is that perhaps Delta Force, perhaps the special helicopter units that have done these kinds of things in the past have been called into action to seize this target of opportunity.
Can we take this any further? My question of you, Mr. Blackwell, would be this. If only last night U.S. forces managed to overcome and neutralize, as they, in their word, the forces on oil platforms offshore, does that necessarily or does it not indicate to you that they've probably done very little on the Kuwaiti mainland?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. The Pentagon has been noticeably silent on ground operations in the Kuwaiti theater, into Kuwait itself, except to say that the reports from early this morning that the ground campaign is not likely to begin until well into February. Leading up to a ground campaign, military doctrine holds that you have to prepare the way with airstrikes and with raids and special operating forces conducting operations deep behind enemy lines, and this looks like one of those things that would be typical of those kinds of preparatory actions.
And of course, we bear in mind that there are now a reported total of 8 planes from the Allied coalition lost during the course of the fighting up to this date. These forces were said to have been firing on coalition aircraft with anti-aircraft artillery. That has now, we are told, been neutralized. James Blackwell, thank you for joining us from Washington. Bobby?
Bob, we have a late development from Moscow concerning that U.S. summit that is coming up. There was speculation that the events in the Gulf might postpone, delay, or cancel that summit, but the U.S.-Soviet summit in Moscow, which is scheduled for February 11th through the 13th, will go ahead as planned, and that is according to the Soviet Foreign Ministry. In fact, a preparatory meeting will be held in Washington on Friday between the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Soviet Union, Alexei Abukov, and U.S. Undersecretary of State Reginald Bartholomew. And experts predict that there will be an effort made to hammer out a treaty on strategic arms reductions. Again, we are announcing that the U.S.-Soviet summit in Moscow, which is scheduled for February 11th through the 13th, will go ahead as planned, despite the events in the Gulf. And our coverage of the war in the Gulf will continue right after this.
Let us take a moment to look at some domestic editorial comment on the Persian Gulf War and recent developments. This from the Washington Post. The point of the airstrikes and their promise is either to fatally weaken the Iraqi capacity to conduct an effective ground campaign or to preempt even the need for one. One cliche, that about the wisdom of trying to avoid a ground war in such an environment, still holds good. And from the Los Angeles Times, the current protests are the product not of a nation divided, but of a society that is sufficiently self-confident to accommodate differing political views even at a time of crisis. We are precisely that kind of society.
The 1st U.S. Marine Division Taskforce Ripper is preparing for the possibility of ground fighting. Taskforce Ripper is studying Saddam Hussein's weaknesses and waiting for the order to go. Pool reporter Brad Willis has that story.
Deployed across a wide expanse of desert, the 3rd Artillery Battalion, 11th Marines, Taskforce Ripper. It's expected that soon these forces will bear the brunt of battle against the troops of Saddam Hussein. These Marines have nicknamed their battalion Hard as Hell Hotel, meaning they're willing to deploy and live anywhere, no matter how hard the circumstances, willing to fight like hell, no matter what the war.
How you doing?
Even with war underway, reinforcements are still pouring in, beefing up the crews that will man these howitzers in conflict. Weapons designed for close-in fighting, to knock out tanks and anti-aircraft. Commanding Officer Captain Danny Odom.
I think we'll face some dug-in, combat-hardened veterans that are going to stand and fight to a point. And I think that we'll face some pretty well-directed fire. But I think that given the attacks today, that our air superiority will enable us to pretty much defeat that early on.
At the heart of the 3rd Battalion is the Radio Command Center, where all movement and firing of the howitzers will be coordinated. These days are spent mapping the sites of aerial bombardments, looking for weaknesses in the deployment of Saddam's forces. While the air war has gone well, these Marines know that any ground battle will bring heavy casualties.
There's no doubt that he has a very fortified defensive position. I'd like to think that we're smart enough to find the seams and the gaps, and that our intel will come through for us and let us find the seams that we need to minimize casualties and blow on through and make sure he goes back where he's supposed to be, and that's on the other side of the border.
For now, Taskforce Ripper waits for the order to move north. Their eyes on maps of Kuwait, their minds on Saddam Hussein.
Just like to, if nothing else, see Saddam standing on his knees, just like we're doing now, and saying, please stop.
With the Marine 1st Division, Brad Willis, Saudi Arabia.
Sooner the better.
Blood banks across the United States are crowded with donors offering blood. Both the American Red Cross and the American Association of Blood Banks say they have met the current needs of the Pentagon for blood supplies. Some blood donation centers say they're now getting about double the number of donations they usually get. Some blood banks say they're getting more offers for donations, in fact, than they can handle.
The thirst for information about the Persian Gulf has turned many in the U.S. into radio and TV addicts. Some stores are reporting brisk sales for radios and miniature TV sets. Department stores say their TV departments are often crowded with people trying to catch the latest news from television sets on display. And some video stores say rentals and sales of movies have declined during this crisis.
Security for professional football's Super Bowl is being tightened because of the fear of terrorist acts in connection with the Persian Gulf War. Super Bowl 25 is next Sunday in Tampa, Florida. Authorities say the Tampa Stadium has been sealed off since Wednesday. All vehicles being searched as they enter the parking lots. Ticket holders coming into the stadium will be subject to personal searches. Metal detection gates may be set up. Authorities say packages, bottles, portable radios, and umbrellas are all banned. And workers are setting up concrete barriers to stop potential car bombers.
Making ends meet each month is tough for some people whose family members are on military duty in the Persian Gulf. CNN's Mike Capps reports a religious ministry is helping some families in Dallas.
Military reservists sign up for different reasons: patriotism, adventure, and a second paycheck. When called to active duty, many reservists found their income cut in half or more, with their families left to pay the bills.
They have an apartment, the rent doesn't change, the car payment, the fixed payment doesn't change, heating, lighting costs, all those things are all basically the same.
Marines at Dallas Naval Air Station unloaded 30,000 pounds of food donated from a religious ministry. Non-perishable items, cereals, canned goods, soda, all for distribution to families of military reservists.
They said they're going to provide us more food when we need it and more items that would be needed by the younger families, for example, diapers, things of that nature that cost a lot of money and that they can help provide us.
It means I've got food for my kids that I can go down and get.
Hey, don't!
Sandy's circle has two rambunctious children, 4-year-old Stephanie and 3-year-old Jeffrey. Sandy's husband, Gary, trains with his Marine Reserve unit, awaiting duty assignment in Saudi Arabia. Unlike many reservists, Gary's employer supplements his regular salary. Still, Sandy can use the help.
They told us when we were down there to take advantage of it. Just, you know, that's what it's there for. And if it comes down to my kids eating, I will.
Although the program started in Dallas, military leaders hope to expand it to other bases on the east and west coasts. Mike Capps, CNN, Dallas.
World economics, an ever-changing machine affecting every minute of your life. CNN gives you a look at this machine each day in a way you can understand. Business news to keep you in time with change on CNN.
Let us look briefly at news other than in the Persian Gulf on this Saturday. Snared by debts and labor strife, Eastern Airlines this morning is grounded. The company's executives plan a news conference outlining the airline's future, if any, a little later this morning. A slackening economy has also contributed to Eastern's decision to shut down. The airline's troubles began when Eastern's labor unions and former chairman Frank Lorenzo clashed. A long strike cut the number of flights with a drastic reduction in revenue. Passengers and employees say they have nothing but regrets.
I've always thought they were a good airline. I'm sorry to see them go out of business.
Father worked at Eastern for 25 years. My uncle worked at Eastern for 23. And it was several people in my family was affected. My wife worked there too.
Eastern's ticket holders are being told they will get either refunds or seats on other airlines. Lithuanian separatists say they have new evidence Moscow did direct the bloody crackdown last weekend in Vilnius. A Moscow evening newspapers reporting KGB agents were sent into Vilnius even before Soviet troops. And on Sunday, when troops did attack the Lithuanian Broadcast Center, one of the 14 people killed was a secret policeman. A very tense standoff continues in that Baltic Republic, and there are complaints that Soviet troops have been roughing up private citizens.
The Missouri Court of Appeals has ruled that a brain-damaged woman cannot be moved to a state with a more lenient right-to-die law for at least 10 days. The father of Christine Busalaki wanted to move her to Minnesota. Minnesota law allows families and doctors more leeway than Missouri law in deciding whether to end life support for the severely disabled. The Missouri Court of Appeals says it will review the case. Christine Busalaki suffered brain damage in a 1987 car crash. Court documents show the CIA and the U.S. Army paid Manuel Noriega more than $320,000 in money and gifts in the 31 years from 1955 to 1986. Prosecutors filed the documents in Miami, where the former Panamanian leader awaits trial on drug charges. They say they released the information to counter statements by the defense that the CIA paid Noriega millions of dollars. Defense claims the CIA paid Noriega $11 million and possibly more.
This programming note, much of CNN's weekend news feature programming will be preempted for continuous coverage of the war in the Gulf. Many sports shows will air as scheduled, but other feature programs have been suspended for this weekend.
And that is it for this hour. We'll take a short pause, but our coverage in the Gulf will continue momentarily. I'm Bobby Batista.
I'm Bob Kane.
This is the EF-111A Raven. Its mission is to jam enemy radar systems.
You eager to go back up?
I sure am. That's what I'm paid to do. My heartbeat always goes up on a catch shot off a carrier, too.
We were loving it. We were ecstatic. We were like, yes, we did the job. The pilots did their job. Nobody got hurt. Ready? Because they got a job they got to do, and we got to do a job we got to do. Okay.
I'll say thank you. Good one.
CNN.
Good morning. We continue now with our coverage of the war in the Gulf. I'm Bobby Batista.
I'm Bob Kane. There have been military developments in the Gulf War. CNN's Pentagon correspondent Gene Randall is standing by. Gene.
Good morning, Bob and Bobby. We have word of the first Iraqi prisoners taken by U.S. forces in Operation Desert Storm. The report came a short time ago in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The military spokesman was Army Lieutenant Colonel Greg Pepin.
Ladies and gentlemen, last night the guided missile frigate, the USS Nicholas, and Army helicopters, together with a Kuwaiti patrol boat, engaged and neutralized Iraqi forces operating from 9 Kuwaiti oil platforms in the northern Arabian Gulf. The Iraqi forces have been firing on coalition aircraft with anti-aircraft artillery and shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. 12 Iraqi prisoners were taken and are presently aboard the Kuwaiti patrol boat and the USS Nicholas. The Iraqi soldiers will be transferred to a United States Marine holding facility and eventually transferred to a prisoner of war camp. This is all the information we have on this incident at this time.
A Pentagon official says this action shows a high degree of military coordination. He says despite all the predictions of difficulties with the command and control element of Operation Desert Shield, now Operation Desert Storm, today's action illustrates the system is in fact working and working quite well. Meanwhile, the overnight missile attack on Israel forcefully made the point that despite some Allied success in knocking out some mobile launchers in Iraq, there is still a lot to be done. British Prime Minister John Major talked about the Iraqi missile threat in London today.
We've had a considerable amount of success thus far in finding them and destroying them. Both the United States Air Force and ours have destroyed Scud missile launchers. We cannot, of course, be precisely sure how many the Iraqis have. They clearly have a substantial number left. The mission to seek them out and destroy them will continue until we're satisfied they've all been found and destroyed.
And certainly that is still a top priority item, destroying the Scud missiles of the type that hit Israel overnight for the second consecutive night. Gene Randall, CNN Live at the Pentagon.
Well, Bush administration officials say the United States will provide Israel with more Patriot missiles. That in response to a second Iraqi attack on Israel early this morning. Richard Roth is in Tel Aviv now and joins us with an update from there. Richard?
Yes. An Israeli Defense Ministry spokesman, Brigadier General Nachman Shai, was asked about reports of an additional deployment here or sending by the U.S. of Patriot missiles. He would only say, quote, that's very interesting news. However, he did say and confirm that Israel has received the Patriot missiles in the last few weeks, but he said, quote, we have not stated whether they are operational yet. I mean, the Patriots, of course, are rather anti-missile weapons that perhaps could be used against these incoming Scud missiles from western Iraq. He said that if there was to be some more Patriot missiles sent from the U.S., he would find that, quote, encouraging. This Brigadier General talked about a lot of topics at a news conference briefing a couple of hours ago. He said that Israel believes Iraq is firmly trying to drag it into a conflict. He said he called what's happening now a new war, but he did not say whether Israel would definitely come out and retaliate, though he said Israel has the right to protect itself and it alone would decide how and when. Now, the latest Iraqi missile attack occurred very early this morning, and despite the previous attack on Friday, some here were caught off guard by the timing of the latest Iraqi assault.
After 2 false alarms during the night, when the sun came up on Tel Aviv, many thought Israel had avoided another night of Iraqi missile attacks. They were wrong. Millions went into the sealed rooms and shelters while the missiles fell. There was fear it would be a chemical weapons attack. The missiles were fired from western Iraq. The Scud slammed into civilian neighborhoods, tearing into homes and stores. One made a direct hit on a bomb shelter which was empty at the time. These men yelled, the government wanted us to stay in there, but we thought it wasn't safe. The government said at least 10 people were lightly injured in the attacks. Tel Aviv residents saw the missiles come in and felt the effects of the blast.
We heard the boom and everyone sit in the floor and try to be little not confused.
The ground-to-ground missiles had conventional warheads, not chemical ones. Men in chemical suits, though, were on the scene quickly in the zones that were affected. A lot of property damage in those areas, but casualties were low. Authorities say it's a miracle the missile strikes did not result in any deaths.
Thanks God. No casualties, 3 slightly wounded. The buildings which were damaged will be renovated and repaired. This we can always do. Life of people who can never bring again. This is not the last missile.
Israel told its citizens to stay indoors once again, though the explosions forced many out into the streets to look for family and friends. The morale of the city still seems high. People are remaining calm in the wake of 2 nights of terror.
People seeing us consoling them have such a boost of morale that it is more than any psychologist can do for them.
But Tel Aviv remains the favorite target of Saddam Hussein.
Now, the Israeli Defense Force spokesman was asked whether he would consider so far it a failure by the U.S.-led coalition to knock out these Scud mobile launchers. He did not say so. He said that many of them are mobile, are hidden, difficult to find, that Saddam Hussein has more of them, and he expects more missiles to come in this way. Some other news to update. We reported earlier about movements of U.S. Embassy staffers and dependents. Some are being relocated within Israel, some who are here in Tel Aviv. In the territories, the occupied territories, a curfew continues. That started a few days before you might call a missile-imposed curfew on residents of Tel Aviv here. In the occupied territories, they've been on a curfew for 5, in some areas 7 days. There are complaints about shortages of food and other supplies. The government says that there are some accusations, I should say first, by Palestinian sources that no sirens have been heard there. The government of Israel says there aren't going to be sirens because they don't expect that area to be a target. The streets of Tel Aviv remain quiet. Everyone is still remaining in their homes. The government spokesman said there's been no change in tactics regarding civil defense, that people should go to sealed rooms instead necessarily of bomb shelters. The threat is still believed to be coming from either conventional or chemical. The spokesman said just because Saddam Hussein has not used chemical weapons doesn't mean that he doesn't have them anymore. This is Richard Roth, CNN, reporting live from Tel Aviv.
Richard, I may be throwing you kind of a technical question, but do you have any idea how long it takes to get a Patriot missile operational?
No, I could not say how long it would take to get a Patriot missile operational.
All right, thanks. We are standing by for the possible coverage of a British military briefing from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. In the meantime, let's find out what's going on there with our correspondent, Rick Salinger there. Rick?
Hello, Bobby. Latest word here from eastern Saudi Arabia is that 2 more U.S. planes are reported missing today, each with 2-man crews, an F-15 and an A-6. That would bring the total number from the multinational coalition of missing or lost to 7 or 8, depending on the confirmation. But they run about 2,000 sorties a day, and with this war now 3 days old, that would be about 6,000 sorties. So the percentage of those that do not come back is extremely small. That is thanks in part to the work of the ground crews. Greg Lamont takes a look at a day in the life of the ground crews.
The war against Iraq involves the world's most powerful air armada ever assembled. The attacks are relentless. It is a 24-hour-a-day, non-stop, exhausting mission for those in the cockpit and on the ground.
Yeah, that's the way it's been going, and you guys could do the first go, we'll do the second. All right, then.
Grab it whenever and wherever you can. And when you do, you dream.
Just want to get it over with. I'm just excited to be here and hope that we can get this thing over with quick and get home.
Despite the advanced technology, there are some things about war that never change.
Talk to you when I get back. What's another thought?
Some won't come back.
I see every one of them every day, and we all feel bad that we have an airplane missing. At the same time, no one has lost focus or their focus on the fact that they still have a big job to do, as we all do, and I see fire in their eyes and a highly motivated fighting force here.
Greg Lamont, CNN, Saudi Arabia.
While there have been some 1,300 military aircraft operating in the area, there have been no civilian airplanes operating since this war began. And what that means is there's been no way for the civilian population to get out if they so choose. Now the United States Consulate here in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, has announced that it is sponsoring military flights for those U.S. citizens and their dependents in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia only who may want to leave. Now, these flights have not been scheduled as of now. They will be military flights, and they will cost the individuals maybe up to 50% more than a normal flight would cost. The destination has not even been revealed as to now, but perhaps it will be to Europe. In any event, it will be a way to get to a safe place if they choose. So that's it from Saudi Arabia, at least for now. Reporting live, I'm Rick Salinger, CNN.
Rick, are those flights considered an evacuation?
It is a matter of semantics. In fact, the U.S. Consul General here is saying it is not an evacuation. In fact, no one is being asked to leave. It is a voluntary departure. Those are the two words they are using.
All right, Rick Salinger, thanks very much. And we'll be back in just a moment with more coverage from the Gulf. Stay with us.